You only get forever to make another impression, right? Everyone's like, no, that's how my mom taught me. My mom taught me you got to make a good first impression. And I'm like, that's exactly right. And you have to treat every impression, like it's the first impression. Because it is. Because every time you interact with that person, be it a coworker, a customer, a stakeholder in some way, shape, or form, you're establishing an impression each time they work with you. So you've got to make sure that you make the best one possible.
In prepping for this discussion, I read your book, Never Sit in the Lobby, 57 Winning Sales Factors. And what hit me about it, I kept going through reading it. It's like, yes. Like every one of these things, clearly you've been in the room multiple times coming up with that. What motivated you to write this book? It's one of the best frontline salesperson books and even sales leadership books I've ever read.
Well, I started writing the rules I joined sales in around 85, and I had, I guess, the pleasure of working with some really good salespeople. And I mean, really, in a lot of ways, not much has changed, but I mean, everything we did back then was basically get in front of customers, find out what they're doing, show them products, book the business. And, and I ran a territory in Southern Ontario, and these guys that owned the company, I mean, they had some really good disciplines that they followed. And I realized that they were doing things over and over again. Right. And so I started writing them down. And, a lot of them I sort of named after one of the guys, and some of the rules, don't do this, whatever. I would name, the factors. That's where the factors came up, right? Like the Brian factor, the Tony factor, that kind of a thing, right? And of course, for the book, I had to change their names, but because you're like, hey, wait, I don't remember the Tony one, but and the hardest part for me is to remember the fake names, because I always remember the stories from the real world, right? But anyways, and so I started sharing them. People would laugh and say, "Oh my God, that's so funny," or "That's so true," or whatever. And then some people asked me to come and like talk at their sales meetings and stuff, say, "Hey, can you share some of these rules?" And and so I got a couple, and then some people are like, "Oh, you should write a book," right? I'm like, "Yeah, I should write a book." And of course I never did, right? I mean, just the days went on and time went on, years went on. And then when the pandemic hit, I'd always had this thing, I was going to write this book. And I also knew that I was kind of gearing up to be selling the business and whatever. And there may be like a twilight time in my career or something. I didn't know how it might play out. So I thought, I'm stuck at home in Canada. The lockdown was quite long. I thought I got nothing else to do. So if I'm going to do it, let's do it now. And then I buckled down on the weekends, and I committed to writing, writing every weekend until I got to a sufficient number of words. And throughout the pandemic, I got it edited. And the funny thing is, the week that I sold the company, where the paperwork was finally signed, ended up being the week that the book came out on Amazon, which was really coincidental and funny to, in many ways. But
well, it's a lot coming together all at once. That's for sure.
Yeah, for sure. So that's how the book came to be. Yeah.
Okay. And then the reason for it, I think I remember you're talking about something around, like get, act, stay in front of the customers, be a pleasure to work with always. I mean, is that the primary value that you get out of the book?
Yeah, and exactly. And I mean, again, now it's 2024. I mean, the pandemic's been over for a while, but unfortunately, the behaviors keep coming back up nowadays, right? Like work from home, remote work, close the office. Like a lot of these have created lots of problems for the people, right? So even now, I find myself, the book is kind of like a thing. So I can say, when the guy says, well, what do I do when I go and see the customer? I don't know, what am I going to talk about? I'm used to doing it on Zoom or whatever. I'm like, just show up with something in your hand and something in your mind. Right. And, and I just have all these different rules, right, that I follow and how to behave. And that's where I came up over the years with the mantra of you need to learn how to get, act, and stay in front of your clients, and to be a pleasure to do business with always. Right. And I'm very particular about all that parts, because a lot of people can get in front of the customers and act professionally or something. Then when they lose the business, they're not a pleasure to do business with, right? They get angry or cross or whatever. And so I try to and the whole basis of building the company, Gap Wireless, that I sold in 2022, was to do everything I'd done in a prior business, but also to add this mantra of being a pleasure, because I'd seen the company, my original company, evolve into one where I didn't find we were a pleasure all the time, and it wasn't easy to do business with. And I said, I want that to be the kind of like one of the table stakes or whatever of the business, and the way we answer the phone, and we always pick up the phone, and things like that, right? Commitment to call people back, and of course, just that we hire people that are a pleasure to do business with, and what have you, right? So yeah, I just wrote it as kind of a little guidebook of rules you can follow, when you're faced with having to do outside selling, face to face selling, and that's kind of my target audience are people. Although some of it is now done remotely and via Zoom and whatever, we're selling high ticket items, and most of the items that we sell, a customer wants to look at them in order before they're going to make a purchasing decision. So if the customer wants to look at your products, they also need to look at you, right? You can't just, there's another one of the rules, never fax the facts, never ship the shit, right? And so that's one of the golden rules, right? About, if they want something, you hand deliver it. If they need to see a demo, you bring it to them, you set it up, kind of a thing, right?
Yeah. So everything in there, totally agree. I've lived it a few times with a number of salespeople all over the world. So one of the companies I sold in 2016, we were doing business in 60 countries. Got to experience what you call the Gleason in the book, which is hilarious.
Yeah.
At least 30 different cultures. We'll get into that. But I got to see all this stuff going on, and so my question is, if a salesperson says, "How do I handle this better?" You can go to your book and you can find things that will give them clues. If they knew all this stuff, they would just do it. They're not doing it. So the question is, how does a salesperson think about, or even a sales leader think about where to start cultivating their capabilities? Because that's a lot of stuff.
You mean like if you're brand new, or if you're just trying to, refine your process? I just want to
Oh,
make sure I take it from the right angle.
Oh yeah, and almost anywhere. But I could say even an established salesperson that wants to get better, how do they think about where to start cultivating to get better at selling value? Yeah.
Yeah. So, well, the one thing is that yeah, I mean, I always start with my motivation and what's motivating me, and am I really in the right role, or the right, because a lot of people think I could never be a salesman, and but a lot of people can be really good at it, but a lot of people that are salesmen probably shouldn't be, right? So, I mean, one thing I always often challenge people is to say, like, it's the best job where you can make a ton of money. It's also the worst job where you can be paid a pittance, right? Because when you're good, you get paid for it. You get paid for your results. When you're bad, the results are the same, right? They're poor, right? You get poor results, poor input, right? So I always want people to start with their motivation, but I mean, I always start with the basics. And, one of the things that's important to me is, like, am I selling a product that I love? Right. And, so there's a rule in the book, where I talk about, if you're not selling the number one or two brand, you should quit your job after a few months of learning the trade or whatever, and go to the better brand, right? Like, because if you're going to sell number three or four, you might be the best salesman out of the four brands being sold at any moment in time, but number one and two are going to get the business 80% of the time. So you're dealing with a smaller set of available market, and you're just wasting, and you can't replace today. Once today's gone, it's gone, right? So you might as well sell the best that you could get. So I always tell people, be careful of the brands you align yourself with, and always try to sell the best brands possible, right? So start with a brand that you love, and then you have to learn how to love the product, and because when you love the product and you're passionate about it, then you're able to get the customers attracted to the product in a similar way, right? You're able to show it in its best light. I've got the chapter on WSP, right? The winning sales presence, which is all about the whole psychological concept of that attraction is not a choice, right? And that The when something is truly attractive, people just recognize it as attractive. They don't have to stand there with a sign saying, "Hi, look at me, I'm pretty." Right? Let's, you see flowers, you see, good looking person or whatever. You're just naturally attracted to them by virtue of their natural attraction, right? And the thing is with a lot of guys and people that are selling is they don't allow the product to exist in its best light. They try to brag about the product, right? Like, I've got the best this and the biggest that and the bigger, faster, wider, deeper, 20% cheaper. Get it now while it lasts before it's gone, or that kind of braggadocious selling, right? I'm always explaining to people to try to get into the customer's mind cycle and mind and figure out what it is, why they would need to buy the kind of product that you sell, right? And like, is it because of speed? Is it because of throughput? Is it because of accuracy or quality of a system in some way, or volume, and then figure out, how to demonstrate your product in the best possible light to let those features shine naturally, right? And then the customer becomes naturally attracted to it, and as you do that, and when you're successful, the customer ends up starting to close themselves. Wow, that thing's really cool. Like, oh my God, how many do you have out there in the market, or how much does that cost? And you're starting to see them become a natural affinity for what you're doing, right? So I know I'm kind of rambling a bit. I might have got a little off topic on the question, so I'll give you a chance to maybe rehome the.
I think all this is really good. And when I read the book, and I work with companies from startup, small, medium, large, even extra large in the public space, your stuff applies everywhere from what I can tell.
Right.
Are you
Oh yeah.
noticing it doesn't matter the size? Okay. So when you talk about align with the best brands, most companies are small businesses, right? And I would think as subsets, no matter what you're representing, could be a machine shop, a coffee shop, whatever it is, there's still going to be recognized brands at that level wherever you're at in each
Yeah.
market, right? Okay.
Yes. Yeah. Well, yeah, and I mean, I realize that there may be like a multitude of brands in play, but a lot of time, when you're selling, you know, uh, products or whatever, there typically will be series of, like, for instance, I mean, I don't sell cars, I never have, but I like to use them as examples because, like, for instance, if you're selling, you could sell European cars, or you could sell Japanese cars, or you could sell American made cars, or, um, and so first figure out, which one you want to sell. I'd rather sell the German cars. I have an affinity for that. And then you decide, am I going to sell BMW, Audi, or Mercedes, or whatever, right? Or then, Honda, Toyota, et cetera, right? And so, and somewhere in there, I'm just saying, a lot of people, if I was going to sell Japanese cars, I probably wouldn't go to work with Subaru. Great car, especially if you want to, like, skill, like a lot of people that ski and things like that and go off road and hiking, and they love Subarus because they're just indestructible. But I mean, they're not the everyday. You'd be fighting uphill with most customers to get them to choose Subaru over, let's say, Honda or Toyota kind of thing, right? And so I just counsel them to be careful about how much time you waste on building a brand, because unless you maybe you own the brand, because you just work for them, right? And your time is valuable as being an ambassador, and so to just make sure that your time is best spent, right? The other part of the rule as well is I'd rather be last than second, right? And so regardless of which brand you pick, you may pick a brand because you love it and that's the one, and maybe it's not number one or what have you. But there'll become a point in the sales cycle where definitively that you're not getting the business, right? Like, there's times where you're not sure, you feel good about something or whatever, but there will become a moment where you're not getting the business, and it could occur at any moment, right? And the trick is, the moment that you get to that point, you want to recuse yourself from the sales cycle and extract yourself and go find another quick customer as quickly as possible. And my whole idea is, like, if you're covering a territory and you're competing against other brands, well, your competitor is in the room selling against you at that one place. You're losing, right? Well, get out of there and go to the next customer before he even has time to get there, and say, oh, you know what? That big brand never visits us. You're the only one that ever calls on us, right? build a following around other things, right? And so because if once you're last, I'd rather, like, that's the whole idea behind the rule. I'd rather be last than second, because second takes just as long as first and you don't win,
To still lose,
right?
right?
Yeah,
Right.
it's second is the first loser, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'd
And
rather lose quickly and move
yeah,
on and find a new customer that I can sell to. And that's
yeah.
one of the most valuable rules that I've ever learned. And
I love that.
about,
And in the book, you talk about the 20-80 rule. I mean, everybody knows about the 80-20, but the 20-80 and how you spend your
yeah,
time. Talk
right.
about that. Yeah, that
Yeah.
was
So because I actually had this in this, subsection of some of the products that we sold, we competed against an 800-pound gorilla and a global brand, kind of like of the ilk of like an IBM or a Dell or something, like one of those ones where no one ever got fired for buying IBM, kind of a company, right? And we had the number two, number three, it moved around brand of these instruments that we sold. And they were measuring instruments, not musical instruments. And the and so what I realized is that these products typically get sold to large companies, like for instance an electronics company, like maybe like a Honeywell or something like that, right? But around a Honeywell is all sorts of companies that build ancillary technology for Honeywell, right? And so the big brand, the 800-pound gorilla, well, this guy's got a badge with the Honeywell on it. He has a desk at Honeywell, and he shows up every day and he takes orders for these products. And do you think that when he's collected another 100 grand of orders that week, at 4 o'clock, when he leaves early or clocks out at 3:30 that day, that he stops around and visits all those other clients around the big client? Almost never does, right? And so, although I spend my time trying to get access to some of the business at a Honeywell, for instance, oftentimes through contracts and large scale business MSAs, like master supply arrangements and things, I couldn't win unless this 800-pound gorilla couldn't get the business, right? And so I would compete where it was appropriate. If I was losing, I would leave, but then I would spend all my time around those businesses. So I had a reason to go there, and then I would visit all the other ones, and they all would say the same thing. Oh yeah, the gorilla never shows up. They never visit us. They never call enough. We call them. They don't call us back. And things like that, right? And so, and it also works geographically as well, right? A lot of the bigger brands, they just say, well, if you want to buy it, send us an order. We're not going to fly to Winnipeg in the middle of the winter, right? I go on extensively in the book about Winnipeg, or Winterpeg as we call it, right? And I would go every 6 weeks or every 6 to 8 weeks, bar none. I'd always be there. And I always was setting up my calls while I was there. I've said, I'm back in 6 weeks. I'll bring you the product. I'll do this. And I always had work to do. And they're like, we can't believe how often you come and see us. We like giving you the business, and people would realize they were losing business in Winnipeg. And then they'd say, hey, go to Winnipeg and figure out why Glenn's taking all those orders. The guy would fly into Winnipeg once, right, for a day or a day and a half. He's like, oh my God, it's cold here. You got to plug in your car in order for it to start, right, in the morning. And he'd say, no, boss, there's nothing there. I don't know what, like, I don't know what you're smoking, but there's nothing in Winnipeg. I'm not going back. I'll go once a year, right? And every 6 weeks I'd be back. And and they would say, hey, you should go see my husband, my cousin, my uncle, my friend, my this, my that. And they'd give me all sorts of leads to keep me coming back. And so if, that's where the 80-20 works there as well. Right. And so you focus on the 20 that the 80 guy's not getting, but can be your 80. Right. And there still becomes enough to go around. And I found it to be a worthwhile concept anyway. So.
No, I love it.
Yeah.
You've obviously worked with a lot of organizations and gotten a look at their sales departments. When I talk to CEOs, sales can be an issue. A number of them actually say, I think things are going great on the sales side. But my experience is most of the sales machines that they build have huge room for improvement. What are you seeing there?
Yeah. The number one thing that I sort of see is does the compensation plans line up with the objectives of the business? And has there been a proper amount of thought and consideration in all respects? I mean, I'm talking about a holistic, not just for the company. Is it best for the company? But I mean, Are you driving the behavior that you want with your compensation plan? And what are the metrics and measurables that people are held accountable to? And how do you operate your business so that you can monitoring the measurables and keeping people on tasks to hitting those objectives, right? And so oftentimes they're kind of like, if sales are good, salespeople are good, and if sales are bad, they suck. And what's wrong? And let's fire some people and get some new sales, right? And I mean, there's a lot more to it than that. There's scientific, approach that you should take. And if you're not planning, fail to plan to fail, right? Kind of thing, right? And so, I believe in creating an annual plan with the people, setting metrics and benchmarks for 90 days, and 90 days sit down and go through every one of those plans and show them that you meant business on the plan you wrote 90 days ago. Not give me an annual plan every December and then put it away for a year and write me a new one a year from now and nobody reads it, right? And so, you know, develop some systems and a series of accountability metrics that you can use to keep people honest and measure to those numbers and make sure people know that you'll hold them accountable.
Well, I like the way you're saying that because I see it. Sales are great. My team's great. Sales are bad. My team sucks. It would be so much better if all the CEOs knew they had the right sales system or processes in place that drives all the right behaviors in there. Right?
Yeah.
And I'm not sure a lot of CEOs spend the time that they should making sure that the machine is built properly, driving the right behavior
Right. Yeah.
in there. So, yeah, thank you for that. Identifying good salespeople. So,
Yeah.
a lot of
That's a tough one.
salespeople are so good at selling themselves, and then they don't sell anything for the company. What's going on there, and how do we do that better?
Well, the one thing is that, that's really almost like a black art magic or something. I don't know, because like we've all like given our head a shake about why did I hire those people, right? Or and you think, oh, I did so much work this time, and then all of a sudden it's a fail, right? And the you know so I don't have any like magic answers about it, but I mean the one thing that I often caution people to be aware of is like people that move around too much, right? So oftentimes because I'm always sort of looking at resumes, right? I'll see, okay, well, from 2012 to 2014, he was here, right? From 2014 to 2016, 2016 to 2018. I'm like, oh, okay. So it takes him exactly 2 years to piss off everybody and get fired, right? Like that's as long as he can manage at a customer before they let him go, right? Or maybe it's 18 months or, you know, a little bit long, but you tend to see these patterns in their life cycle. The other one that I notice as often is that they have like a long stretch, like 9 years at a company, and then it's a year, right? And they were in some kind of a role. Maybe they were packaged out or something along those lines, but they never found solid footing after that, right? I'm very weary of people like that too. So I like to look for people that have like 5 to 7 years at a couple of places. Depends on what age you're looking of, maturity level you're looking for, right? But not a lot of these 1 and 2 year jumps, right? Some of them say, hey, I was successful everywhere and I was just trading up to get more money, and that's fine, but I want more than 2 years of people too, right? So even if you're the best, doesn't, great, I get you for 2 years, get you trained, and then you quit. And so the, the, I also try to get a large swath of the staff to interview the salespeople as well, just to get a sense of, and I try to equip them with a series of questions and stuff that I've developed over time for the questions the CFO will ask, right? The questions that the administrative director would ask, the question that other salesmen will ask, and I give them to them so that, because if you don't, they'll just say, "Oh, what do you do on the weekend?" And "Oh, you hockey? Oh, yeah, my kid's in hockey." And they have these like chats, and he's like, "Oh yeah, he's a nice guy. I like him. He's okay." But I give them all a series of questions, right, all the way down to the lowest common denominator in the business of like a warehouse guy or something, right? To talk to this person and have 4 or 5 um they're not so much strategic, but they're at least questions that would be the guy would never think of on their own to ask, right? And And then they come back and say, well, you know what, like he seemed like, he was very cordial with me and very, deferential and stuff like that. Or perhaps he was, he was not deferential. He was maybe arrogant and didn't have time for me, right?
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. I had a CEO tell me a couple of weeks ago that he looks for salespeople that in their resume, they're very specific with the numbers. He said the
Yeah,
ones that aren't
right.
specific, they almost never work out. And I was thinking, well,
That's a bit, yeah.
maybe there's three parts to this. They're specific with the numbers. You can back up references that they've gotten results. And then I love asking the question, what do you think is important to our customers? And if they haven't even thought about that, they're probably not going to be very good at selling, right?
Yeah. The yeah, and I do like to dive deep into like show me where you go, like your major pieces of business, how'd you win them? Talk to me through it. What were the strategies? You know, um, you know, if you started here today, what would you do in the first 90 days? Things like that, right? Walk me through a typical week at the job you just left or the job you're at now. And, you know, and I joke about in the book about the guy who's like, oh, you know, Mondays and Fridays are my office days, right? And I always joke, oh, so you have a 4-day weekend, right? And basically, right? Because why do you need to be in the office 2 days in a row, right? It's like Friday I'm in the office to catch up, and Monday, just plan the week or whatever. Right? That's not how I do it because I plan in real time, right? Because every call that I have that I end, I already know what the next step is. I don't have to wait till a future moment to set another moment for that customer, right? So we did a demo. They say, okay, can I keep it for a week? And I'm like, well, I can't leave it for a week. Whatever amount they ask me for, I divide it in two, and I say I can leave it for that amount, right? If they say 2 weeks, I say we can leave it for a week. I'll be back here on Thursday to pick it up. Now I know next Thursday I'm back in that building, I'm in that area, and I can visit other customers. And I'm going to pull it from the customer before he's had time to maybe finish the project, and maybe he just wants to get a free demo, right? And there's a whole science behind that as well. But I ask for sales guys how they approach those kinds of things. How do they do demos? Um, you know, so
I feel like you have to have done some sales to ask good questions and know whether you're getting the right answers or good answers. Like,
definitely.
can you have never done sales and interview a salesperson? And
Well, like I said, that's why I give the questions that I want the non-salespeople to ask because they're not particular asking them those kinds of questions. They're asking them more about, oh, telling me you had a challenging customer and they wouldn't pay their bill and how did you handle it, right? The finance, I'll give that question to the finance guy or whatever, right? Or maybe the warehouse guy will be, your customer calls and said he received the box and there's like two missing out of a dozen or whatever, but the warehouse people weigh everything and they know the weight of all the products and they know there were 12 because mathematically it's impossible, right? And so how would you handle that, right? And so yeah, so when it comes to interviewing salespeople, I don't expect non-salespeople to ask the sales questions, but there's a lot of situational questions that I would equip them with questions to ask, right? And and at the end of the day, I mean, sometimes it feels like blind luck, because the fit and the finish sometimes it's just not right. They don't fit the culture and and that's one thing I've learned a lot about in my later years is about the core values of the business and to try to find like all of our measurement systems in our company now we're rewarding hiring firing rewarding motivating bonusing on based on a core value call out, right? Like you violated a core value, you're bad. You exhibited a core value, you're good, kind of a thing, right? And so people take them seriously, and it starts to become part of the culture, right? And sometimes even their top sales guy won't fit the culture. And there's lots of examples about core values where they'll say they top salespeople have been let go because they didn't meet the core values, and it wasn't worth it. They were renegades um, or whatever, and so it was better to part ways than to allow someone that didn't meet the core values to stay and being terrorists within the organization, right? Making everyone else's day miserable.
yeah, 100% of the time, when I've done it, and I'm on my seventh company I've started from scratch, when I get rid of the highest performing salesperson that's a horrible cultural fit, everything gets better, including the sales number. And then companies I work with, the exact same thing happens. So many intellectually understand that, but they don't have the nerve to do it because they're worried about losing the sales that, Susie's the best salesperson we have, even though she might not be a good cultural fit.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's pretty tough. Um, reading the room, I find to be quite a challenge. I see a lot of sales, and I've had these over the years to kind of show up and throw up, if you will. And I even noticed one customer in Asia nodding off as my guy was making a presentation, so I had to jump in and save it.
Well, was it only one guy though? Because I worked with Japan for a long time, right? So there's some rules to have to follow. Was it one guy, or were there several guys and one of the guys was asleep?
No, this was just one person that we were
Oh,
making
okay.
a
Oh, okay.
presentation
Because
to.
oftentimes in Japan, when you're working, there'll be a circle, right? Which is the decision, and they always make their decisions later in a circle, and everyone's awake. But during the meeting, they have an agreement because they work 24 hours a day that at any moment in time, somebody can sleep, not everybody,
Yeah.
right? So they take turns sleeping throughout the day because it's impossible for them to stay awake. And so they're just not all asleep at the same time, right?
I did not know that. This was actually South Korea, but yes, that's
Okay.
interesting. No, that's a new factor. Never heard before. Yeah. So yeah, reading the room is incredibly important.
Yeah.
So it's almost like there's self-awareness, there's being aware of the room, being aware of what's important to the business, to the individual, like all of that. Like, what's the best way for our listeners to think about cultivating that capability? Because I know a lot of
Well,
CEOs that
so
can't.
when you're reading the room, it depends on the room that you're in. But whenever you're going to be faced with being in a room, you never want to invite anyone to the room that you don't need in the room for that particular moment in time, right? And so you don't want to waste, your 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 dance card or whatever, pulling in the CEO at the preliminary demo or whatever. But you may have wanted to have called him in advance of the entire process so that you can always go back to the CEO and maybe pull him in at a certain moment in time, but not that moment, right? So always only have in the room the exact people that you need for the exact purpose that you're trying to achieve at that moment in time, right? And for instance, like if it was the test drive portion, you may only need the driver manager and the drivers, right? Like the bosses don't need to be there, right? And you're kind of wasting their time, right? And I'm just making that up, but I mean, the and your presentation should always appeal to the needs of the people that you need in the room at that moment in time and be appealing to them, right? Like, again, the drivers more care about how it drives, but I mean, the finance guy probably cares about the maintenance and the operating costs and the leasing package and other things like that, right? And so these are different meetings that you're going to have at different times, appealing to different people. Not going to try to do them all at the same time, right? And you would want to have identified all those people in advance. And there's obviously in the book, shameless plug, whatever, there's the story of the tow motor sales guy, right? And who starts at the CEO and says, I want to talk to you about these amazing tow motors that we have. They're 20% more efficient. I don't care about friggin' tow motors, right? But ultimately he says, look, these are $100,000 pieces of equipment. There's no way that a company your size, you're not signing the bill. Like, so don't tell me you don't care in a way, right? He's like, I don't care about tow motors. Talk to my vice president of warehousing, right? It's Paul. So they call Paul and he's like, hey, Paul, I was just talking to Jack, the CEO. And he said, I really needed to touch base with you on these new tow motors that I'm showing. Well, I'm the VP of warehousing. I don't get involved with like the tow motors, Glenn. Like, you need to talk to Bill. He's our director of warehousing and logistics for North America. Then I called Bill. And I said, Bill, I've been on the phone all day with the CEO, Jack, and Paul, the VP. They said, you got to get these tow motors in for a trial. He's like, I don't do that. That's Bob, the warehouse manager. And Bob tells me that the shift supervisor is the one that takes care of the tow motors. And before you know it, I'm talking to Dan, the tow motor driver. But when I deliver the tow motor, I can then call the CEO and I said, you know what? Everybody in the food chain here has been amazed at these machines. I know you're busy, but can you take 2 minutes and come down and have a look at this thing? It's going to blow you away, right? I know you're going to be signing off on it. It's $100,000 investment. You pop down, and all of a sudden the CEO shows up in the warehouse, knows fully well who I am because of our conversations. And at any moment, I can go to Jack, Paul, Bill, Bob, Dave, and I can get their intellectual sign off at any point in the process. And that's the most important thing. I can go anywhere I need to at any moment in time, but I only want to be there for the objective. Like, for instance, them signing it off, right? Like, I know that it's stuck in finance, Bill, what do we have to, oh, well, we have a leasing agreement with the old guys, and and this and that, and they give us this and that or whatever, right? And so, a lot of people, a lot of sales guys, it's like, oh, well, I sent them a quote and it's in the system, you know, waiting for sign off. And I'm like, what does that mean? Like, and so the true sales guy knows where it is at any moment in time in that food chain, because he's willing to pick up the phone and call, hey guys, did that requisition for the tow motors at your desk yet? Nope, don't know what you're talking about. Glenn, I know you sell them, and I know you guys had them in here on trial, but nobody's talked to me about them. I'm gonna go down a level, right? What's going on? Did you requisition the tow motors? And yes, no, or oh no, that's gone to the big wigs for sign off, right? I'm like, okay. And so I'll call Jack, the CEO, and I said, hey, pretty sure it's on your desk. Just want to know if you had any final questions before we get the best tow motors in the business into your warehouse and get your productivity up by 20%, Jack. And he maybe looks over and says, yeah, but it's sitting here and I'll get to it when I get to it, Glenn, or whatever. But the point is, the guy who just starts with the warehouse manager and, brings coffee and donuts and takes some golfing or thinks he's got it covered, he doesn't even know the names of all these other people, but they're all intimately involved in the sale. And that's so important.
Yeah. Well, listening to that example, it's as though getting misdirected inside the organization is now being positively leveraged because you've built all these other relationships on some level to help you get this across. And for me, in my experience, I've done a lot of selling over the years. I want to be in the room to make sure this thing gets to the other side of the room, and I want to know what they're thinking, where they're at, what's important. A lot of salespeople, maybe the majority, don't do that. They shy away from it. Why do they shy away from it?
Yeah. Well, mainly because they're lazy or scared, and but usually a bit of both. And nowadays with the technology, and they think, they can send an email that they crafted in Chat GPT that has a button like, are you still interested in our tow motor? Click yes here or click no. You know what I mean? And they're like, oh, I sent them the auto reply form and they didn't answer or whatever, right? And I'm like, you should have figured out a way to go and see them, even if it's in the lobby for 2 minutes, right? And find out where they're at and say, and call the guy, say, hey, I'm going to be in the lobby tomorrow visiting one of your other guys. Can I get a few minutes? Or just show up in the lobby and call him from the lobby and say, hey, we're just dropping off stuff to someone else. Can you pop down for a minute? I just want to see where we're at, and that's the true sales guy who's always going to show up, always going to go and see them and try to be the closest they can to the customer at any moment in time, where the lazy and the scared are going to try to send an email, say, oh, I sent an email. And he's like, oh, well, did he reply? No. Okay, well, then what'd you do? Well, I called. Oh, okay. And did he answer? No. Well, what'd you do? Oh, I left the voicemail. Okay. So you think it's in the system, but you called and no one answered and no one phoned you back. So then you send an email or vice versa, send an email and they never replied. Sounds to me like you're not getting the business, right?
Yeah. Well, they're not in the
because
game. They're not in the game,
exactly.
right?
Yeah.
They're not in the game.
Yeah.
I always, especially higher ticket items, which you talk a lot about in the book. I like to get approval on the price before I send the quote over. So
Yes.
there's no surprise anywhere. Talk about that, because most will just fire and hope for the best, not.
Yeah, so that's not selling, right? That's like what you just said, fire and pray or whatever, right? And the so the very first job that I had, the president of the company was like, well, why do you need it? Because we had to type the quotes had to be typed. We had administrative assistants, right, formerly called secretaries in the 70s and 80s, in the 80s for me, right? And we typed them on those triplicate forms and we mailed them before the fax machine, right? And that was when I came up with the saying, never fax the fax, after the fax came out, right? Now, of course, it's an email, but I mean, the alliteration doesn't work as well when you use email. So I still say fax the fax, right? And he would say, well, why do you need a quote? And I say, well, they asked me for a quote. And I go, well, are they buying it? And, and of course, he's leading me down the garden path to say, well, the only reason that they need a quote is to give the purchasing so they can send you an order. Otherwise, maybe they're just saying, give me a quote so you can stop bothering, right? And, and so I always, like you're saying, you're pre-checking the price or what have you, but I'm sort of pre-checking the whole behavior of the quote itself. Like, why am I sending a quote? Are you getting ready to buy it? Like, oh, I just want to know what the price is. Oh, well, it's 90 grand. How's that fit in with your budget? Which is sort of what you're saying. He's like, no, I'm filling out a rec. I need a quote, right? So
Yeah, and that's, I mean, you talk about three different types of pricing, and I agree, value-based pricing is by far the best. What are a couple of elements for the listeners to really think about to determine what that right price is to get the work, but not so much you don't or give too much away?
So typically that's kind of like, for me, that's a marketing function, right? And my job is to deliver the price and get the order. I'm not saying I am responsible in my company now. I am responsible for marketing. So I'm not like shirking the question. I'm just saying, I just want to categorize it for the people that are listening to understand that that part of it is actually marketing, which is something that leads up to whether or not you will or won't get an order. It's the being in front of the customer, delivering the pricing, getting the order. That's selling, right? Everything else is marketing, lead generation, website promotion, literature, value pricing models, and I go on sort of ad nauseum in the book about all kinds of different ways of doing pricing and stuff, and and really it's quite lengthy and what have you. But I mean, everything like, because the world I've always exhibited in was like we've been a distributor where we're buying products from around the world and selling them in our local market. And so it's up to us, our sales and marketing team, to go out and figure out where we are in the market and price it up to as close as we can to the leaders, and try to stay within that. So it's really done by a series of sometimes trial and error or whatever. But you know, there's a great story in the book called the Whitson Price Factor, I think is the title, where the number two brand was faced with the dilemma of, they knew they could sell, the instrument was say $100,000 measuring instrument, right? They could come in at 95,000, 5,000 below the competitor, right? But there's 800-pound difference between these two gorillas, right? And so if they come in at 95, well, then the 800-pound gorilla, when necessary, because at 9 out of 10 sales they got anyways, they didn't even invite the second guy. They just dropped to 94,000, right? What do? Race to zero? No, you can't, right? So what the Woodson price factor is you go and you look at the market leader and you price yourself just above them. And you claim, well, that's because we have a better product. I mean, there's more value in our product, and they're better. There needs to be, but I mean, you don't try. And so the moment you're higher than them, what are they going to raise their price to compete against you, right? And then when they discount to try to create a disparity, they look bad, right? And so you say, oh, no, 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 like that's our price, 103, and we can't drop below 100K on this. Maybe we'll get you 3%. That's it. Token discount, to try to get this order in, whatever. But no, we can't drop below 100 grand. And the bigger competitor is faced with, having to use, a more simplistic approach of just trying to offer it for 90K or something, and
Well,
so,
that starts a discussion that you might otherwise not have had.
yeah,
Like, wait a minute, you're a little bit above the incumbent, and it's
right.
better
Why?
instead
Yeah.
of just us two for less. Same kind of
Yeah.
thing. It's
Yeah.
amazing.
But what's important as well, again, just to be redundant or whatever, is that when you're selling that brand, which is a high quality brand, which is like neck and neck or maybe a little bit better than the A brand, the 800-pound gorilla, right? You have to practice that rule of I'd rather be last than second, because you're not going to get all the deals, right? You're only going to get a fraction of the deals, and you will get them because that's just the law of the universe, right? And so the ones you're not getting, you have to recuse yourself quickly, because you got to get to that next deal before the other guy does, so that you can maybe make that next one be one of the ones you win. Because it's possible in some cases where 8 out of 10 might go to the number one, and you're only getting 10 or 20% of the business as the number two brand. Imagine the number three and four, they're getting like a fraction, 2 to 4% play in the market, right? And so yeah, you can price higher, you create the disparity, you create the dialogue. Why are you higher? Because we have better features, faster, bigger, faster, wider, deeper, and the and then but if you find out, hey, you know what, we have a corporate contract with these guys, uh, you know, whenever you hear something like that, you just move on. You just quietly say, okay, well, you know what, like pack up the demo, you're gracious about it, and they say, we understand, and can't wait for the next deal, want to compete, be a pleasure to do business with, always, right? And then move on to the next deal as fast as possible.
Yeah. Well, in the book, I think you talk about it, make the most of your most profitable skills. Don't sit there and spend when you know you're going to
Yeah,
lose and you're just
yeah,
wasting time. I
yeah,
think that's amazing. One of the most powerful concepts in the book for me, and it's going to hit all of us differently, and I recommend our listeners read your book, is this: you only get forever to make another impression. Talk about that.
yeah, yeah.
Love.
So yeah, that's always the one I end with. If someone asks me if there's anything you want to talk about, so the yeah, I mean, that I love saying that, and I'm trying to remember where. Oh, I just can't remember it, but it was completely not related to my work or whatever. Like, it was in the public, like at a shopping or something, and I got to use that saying or whatever in a non-sales environment. But it really is true, right? You only get forever to make another impression, right? Everyone's like, no, that's how my mom taught me. My mom taught me you got to make a good first impression, and I'm like, that's exactly right. And you have to treat every impression like it's the first impression, because it is, right? Because every time you interact with that person, be it a coworker, a customer, a stakeholder in some way, shape, or form, you're establishing an impression each time they work with you. So you've got to make sure that you make the best one possible. And the trick is that people let down their guards, right? They get a job, they're on their best behavior, and then the boss walks by and they're on the Facebook. And they're like, what's the big deal? I was just checking my Facebook and da 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 da. But coincidentally, a week later, the boss walks by again and you're on Facebook, right? You are a bum, permanent, right? Where I'm saying you need to listen for the sound of the boss's footsteps and isolate that sound from all other sounds. And so the moment you hear the boss's footsteps, not only, first of all, don't go on Facebook. Do that on your break outside the building, whatever, in the cafeteria, right? So that you don't have to alt tab, because believe me, he saw you alt tab too, right? But you want to be working on something, and you want not only, as he's walking by, say, you know what, boss, I'm working on this huge project. I'd love to get your advice on something, and always have a question ready to go for people above you, because when they come time for giving out promotions and things like that, they're like, well, that Glenn guy, he's always on, man. He's always working on big deals. He's really in there. Same thing with trade shows, right? Trade shows are a golden opportunity to escalate your career, right? Because you're going to get sent to like Atlanta for a 3-day trade show. They fly in all the product managers from around North America. The VPs are there. The CEO might even be there. You're standing in the booth, and a lot of guys are like jostling on their feet, sitting down on the chairs, maybe during a slow time. I'm like, when you're at that show, you want to be doing one of two things: standing in the aisle, dragging people in, right? So that the boss can see you do it, and then take them around to all the stands that are important. Or if it's really dead, which can happen, you want to be grilling every one of those product managers, vice presidents of departments or whatever. What makes your department so good? Why are you guys so great? Because, typically there's a varied amounts of products at these shows, and there's experts for each one there, right? You want to spend time. Tell me what the 5 top things are. Why do I need to know this, right? Greed-based learning, which I talk about in the book, right? And what happens after the show is that Glenn guy, oh my God, that guy has to have an off switch. He's always on, right? Well, who are we going to send to Barcelona to that break show? Send Glenn, right? You want that to be you. And that's done by making a good first impression every time he meets you, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And it made me think of something in a book around pessimism and how it can really kill creativity and all kinds of things in a salesperson. And I've observed a lot of sales folks start to make everything as an excuse. The operations isn't delivering, service isn't delivering, no, they're not doing their part. That's why I'm failing. What's your advice there? One, attitude, and two, how do you effectively interface with other teams in the organization to work better together?
Well, I was gearing up to give you a different answer on the pessimism, but you kind of switched gears on me. So, um, we're working with the other teams. I mean, again, you're always trying to be a pleasure to do business with, right? So you're always going to be looking for, ways and means to be, um, like to answer the question a different way is like usually when people are miserable or whatever, I find especially like salespeople, the best thing they can do is make sales calls, right? Because it's going to take them outside of their own world of miserability. Because I talk about the miserability index in the book, right? And being at your own steady state of miserability, and you got to get yourself above it. And by making sales calls, it drags you to a higher level and a higher state. And and even if the customers are not buying or it's an economy slowdown or whatever, then you want to go to the customers and you're doing a customer feedback sessions. And whether it could be 5 minutes, 15 minutes, an hour, you have to figure out something appropriate where you can go and ask the customer a whole random bunch of questions. Don't sell them anything. You know what I mean? Like we're coming to do a follow-up survey on our customer service, response times and value added something, something or whatever, right? Like to get and just get out of that office, get out of your environment. So if you're having struggling with other departments, you know, I would suggest setting up meetings or breakout sessions or something where we could go and say, like, what are the challenges you guys are seeing? What are the challenges we are seeing? And then, have breakout sessions to come up with creative solutions and do it in that way where you're asking more than telling, right? Not responding. You're listening to understand, not to respond, right? I go on, blather on endlessly in the book about active listening, right? And empathy, sympathy, and compassion, and learn the difference between all three and when to practice each one. And and so you know, those are the things I use to try to appeal to people that are struggling, right? And especially if they're struggling, recognize that they're struggling and be a good person, right? And
Well, I think that's fantastic advice. One of the things you talk about in the book is always follow up on leads, and so many don't. And the thing that jumped out at me was the whole CRM conundrum, where this seems to be one of the biggest problems is getting salespeople to interact with it the way we've decided. So you came up with a really interesting thing that I'd never thought of before. But talk about that. What's the best way to get salespeople to use the CRM?
um so you're gonna have to remind me which particular section you're talking about, because I mean because there's one where I make them buy the leads, and then there's some other. So I just want to make sure I hit on the
Oh,
right.
no, it's integration with the financial and ERP systems. Like make it you have to use it.
Oh yeah, okay. So yeah, so that's the and that's one that we have in place even now, right? Which is that when a lead gets created, that in order to be financially rewarded for the sale, if it happens, if you were not involved in your portion and documented it in the CRM, you don't get paid. And so because a lot of people, I cover, the New York State or whatever, everything in New York I should get paid on. Well, no, because you're not following up on it or whatever. The customers belong to the business, not the person. You have to earn the right to have and keep each customer, right? That's a huge concept that people struggle with. No, they're my customers. They're actually not your customers. They belong to the business. The business is customers, right? And the business pays the customers pay the business, and so the customers belong to the business, and the business pays you. And so your customer is your boss in a way, right? Your customer is always the person who gives you your paycheck, right? And so we developed systems where it was does this go into the team pool commissions? It's not like we're trying to get out of paying commission, because we have team compensation for the sales support and other kinds of support teams where they've handled the opportunities from cradle to grave. But a sales guy's like, well, that was in New York, I should get paid. And we're like, well, no, because you didn't work on it. And we sent you the lead, you didn't accept the lead, you know. And then the customer called in, talked to our internal team. They did all the work. So no, you're not getting paid. and,
Yeah. Well, comp really does drive behavior. So I
it does.
love that you're tying it all together there.
Yeah.
Yeah. And in the book example, if I remember right, you got some software, everything supposedly integrated, ERP, finances,
Yeah,
financial, and the CRM, but the CRM was a bolt on, so it wasn't integrated, and it created the
right.
same
Yes.
challenge. And so we need to make sure it's integrated, right?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, that's one of the worst things is when CRM becomes an island. And that's very, very common. It's one of the biggest drawbacks in all businesses that the accounting data and the customer data are different, right? Because the accountants only care about what's the bill to and what's the ship to address. Where do the checks come from? And who do I send the invoices to? AP at such and such, AR at such and such, whereas the salespeople want to know who are all the director of this and that and whatever, all the decision makers. And they don't care what the delivery addresses are. They don't care what the banking information is. And so to get a system that's fully integrated is very powerful and make sure that, you can leverage between the two, right? And it's a worthwhile investment.
I wish we had another 8 hours. I have notes on every chapter. There's so many cool things to kind of dig into here. From
Right.
this discussion, Glenn, is there any one big takeaway that stood out to you?
Well, I mean, the one thing that I always want to share with people at the end is if I haven't shared with them, you only get forever to make another impression. It's like, especially in sales, you want to be present for your own success, right? Like you have to be a part of it, and again, you can it's the only really job, except for maybe now influencer on Instagram or something where you can do wacky videos and make a lot of money. But I mean, in the real world, like, day to day world of, it's really the only kind of job where, you can't like go, you don't have to go to school for like 12 years to become a surgeon to make huge amounts of money. You can literally make surgeon level income with a high school education just by learning, your products, learning how to, work with people, learn your negotiation skills. And I mean, there's not a lot of, except for maybe starting your own business where you can just by your own, bringing yourself up by your own bootstraps, you can excel to such heights. Right. And, and sales is one where you can experience leverage as well, right? Most jobs don't allow you to experience the power of leverage, where you could create customers that repeat. And so they repeat, and all you have to do is sort of take care of them and pulse them and keep them happy over time. But the heavy lifting was done years ago, and you can add on to it each year. And especially like insurance sales or someone like that, that's a perfect example where in the beginning, they're hardly making any money, but over time, every customer stays for, the lifetime value and, you can add on to it, right? Whereas if you're the, administrative clerk in that same insurance company, you might go from 45,000 to 85,000 over a course of 20 years working for them. But I mean, you can't go from 45,000 to 450,000. And so, be a part of, your own success by investing in yourself. And, you know, if all else fails, go make a sales call, because that's where the magic happens. And that's where you'll ultimately be happiest, is in front of customers. Even though sometimes your mind's like, oh, I don't feel like doing it today and this and that, you're constantly fighting with yourself. But when you finally get there, and you walk in that door, you become a different person. And it's like showing up at a theater and you're the main actor. And for that time you're there, most things in your life kind of like fall to the wayside. And that's, so you want to spend as much time in that mode as you can.
Yeah. Listening to this, it lean in and do it even when you don't want to do it, especially
Yeah.
when you want to do it, to get you back
Yeah.
on your feet. Glenn, if our listeners want to learn more about the work you're doing or pick up your book, where can they go?
Yeah. So, best thing to do to connect with me would be on LinkedIn, just my name, LinkedIn/my name. And, the book is available on Amazon. I have a website, glennpoulos.com, and you can link directly to the book from there. And, you can also contact me on the website as well. But LinkedIn's probably the best way to get a hold of me if they want to talk. And, the book, of course, is on Amazon and Barnes and Noble and all that. So,
Okay. All right. Well, Glenn,
yeah.
thank you so much for being here. And this has been the Show Your Value podcast. If you got some value out of today, please like and leave a review for this episode. Until next time, show the world your value.